In the brightly lit first-class cabin of Falcon Air Flight 301, the smell of fine leather mixed with the clink of ice glasses in the silence. Everything seemed perfect until a cold voice rang out, "Sir, you don't belong here." The person targeted was Nathaniel Cross, a black man in his early 40s, wearing a dark blue suit, holding a ticket for seat 1A. He didn't argue. He didn't get angry. He just silently watched the flight attendant trying to push him out of the seat he had paid for. The white man sitting behind him, Richard Hale, smiled slightly and slipped a $500 bill into the flight attendant's pocket. Little did they know, the man they were trying to humiliate was no ordinary passenger. He was the founder and owner of Falcon Air, the airline they were flying with. 10 minutes later, on the same flight, everything turned around. Those who thought they were in power trembled before justice, and the humiliated stood up, not with anger, but with a silence that made the whole cabin bow its heads. Before we take off with Nathaniel Cross, please like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on real stories about justice, dignity, and wisdom, where silence is the loudest voice. The morning at San Francisco International Airport was tinged with the pale yellow of the rising sun. The wings of Falcon airplanes lined the runway, reflecting the light like polished steel. In the first-class lounge, Nathaniel Cross sat quietly by the glass door, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand. He looked out, his eyes peaceful, like someone accustomed to the movement of the world. There were no bodyguards, no noise, just a polite black man in a dark blue suit, well-polished shoes, and a leather briefcase with a small logo of Falcon Air, the airline that few people knew he was the founder of. The female announcer's voice rang out, "Flight FZ301 to Cape Town, now boarding. First-class passengers, please proceed to Gate 7. Nathaniel stood up, adjusted his tie, and walked slowly. He greeted the counter clerk with a slight smile, placing his ticket on the counter. The young woman looked over, smiled back, but in the next row, a few other eyes glanced over. A white man in a gray suit, Richard Hale, raised his eyebrows at Nathaniel, then leaned down and whispered to the chief flight attendant standing next to him. His voice was low, but just loud enough for people to hear. "That guy in first class interesting, the head stewardess, Amelia Rhodes," turned to look at Nathaniel. She paused for a moment, her eyes moving quickly from head to toe, as if searching for a flaw in his clothing to justify her suspicions. Then she smiled, a polite smile, but without any warmth. On the plane, the first-class cabin of Falcon Air Flight FZ301 was brightly lit with soft lights, the smell of genuine leather and oak mixed with the scent of expensive perfume. Passengers took their seats, the sound of seat belts clicking like a familiar opening beat. Nathaniel sat in seat 1A, the window seat, quietly put down his briefcase, then opened the airline magazine. A young flight attendant smiled, placing a glass of lemonade in front of him. "Welcome aboard, sir." He nodded slightly. "Thank you." Everything was peaceful until Amelia Rhodes walked in. She approached, her eyes cold and determined, a thin stack of papers in her hand. Beside her, Richard Hale was waiting with an enigmatic smile. Amelia stopped in front of Nathaniel. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a businesslike tone. "There seems to be a problem with your seat." Nathaniel looked up, his voice low and calm. "A problem?" Amelia put the stack of papers down on the small table and continued, "Yes, it appears that seat 1A was reassigned. You'll need to move to 12C in economy. We're sorry for the inconvenience." Nathaniel looked at her, his eyes unchanging. He opened his vest pocket and took out his e-ticket. The seat code read 1A, first class, confirmed. "My ticket says 1A, he said, his voice no higher than necessary. She looked slightly confused, but kept smiling. "There must be a system error. Please move to your reassigned seat so we can depart on time." Behind him, Richard Hale crossed his arms and sneered. He leaned over and whispered, loud enough for Nathaniel to hear, "Just move along. You're holding things up." In the cabin, a few passengers began to look over. A middle-aged couple whispered. A young man furtively turned his head. Nathaniel still did not react. He only said, "I'll stay here until it's resolved." Amelia's voice hardened. "Sir, you don't belong here." The cabin suddenly stopped breathing. The words, though not loud, rang out cold and clear. A few people looked down, avoiding eye contact. Richard Hale smiled, the smile of someone who had just witnessed what he believed to be the natural order of things. Nathaniel put the ticket on the small table. He looked at Amelia calmly. "I understand, but I'll remain seated." No one in the cabin knew that the man being asked to leave his seat was the chairman and founder of Falcon Air, the airline they were all on. He didn't need to speak. He knew the truth was strong enough to stand on its own. All that remained was silence, the silence that characterizes justice when it hasn't been called out. A moment passed. Nathaniel closed his eyes, took a deep breath. He remembered his father's words years ago. "Son, dignity isn't about how people see you. It's about what you choose to do when they don't." When he opened his eyes, the cabin was still abuzz with whispers, but there was no anger in Nathaniel's quiet gaze, only a different strength. Deep and steady as steel, the storm was coming, but he knew it would not be his turn to lose his temper. Up ahead, Amelia Rhodes turned away, whispering into the radio seat reassignment, passenger in 1A refusing to comply. The response from the cockpit was vague, but in her eyes there was a flash of confusion, a confusion she herself hadn't yet recognized. Because in that moment, everyone believed Amelia held the power. In just a few minutes, they would understand who the power truly belonged to. In the deep blue sky, where the distance between people is only measured by the seat, a silent confrontation begins, and it is Nathaniel Cross's silence that will change the way the whole cabin views justice. The first slight vibration of the plane signaled the moment of takeoff. Nathaniel sat still, his hands clasped together, his eyes fixed on the small round window where the horizon faded into mist. He heard the low roar of the engines, the breathing of a great metal beast about to burst into the sky. For many, it was the sound of travel. For him, it was the sound of trial. In first class, the looks still lingered from the incident a few minutes ago. A few people glanced at him, perhaps curiously, perhaps with annoyance. But Nathaniel didn't look back. He didn't need to. He was used to those looks, the kind that were a mixture of surprise and disbelief, as if they were wondering why a black man was sitting where they thought he didn't belong. He adjusted his cuff, his old silver watch gleaming modestly. It was not a luxury item, but a memento of his father who had been an aeronautical engineer. Someday, his father had said, "You will fly, not because others tell you to, but because you give yourself wings." Nathaniel smiled slightly. At 42, he had done it. Falcon Air, the airline he founded, is now one of the icons of premium service in America. However, few people know that behind each flight is a philosophy he always holds in his heart. No one should be discriminated against just because they are born different. This trip to Cape Town was not for signing contracts or making profits. He was there to attend the Falcon Scholars Program, an educational project he sponsored for poor African children, a place he had visited at the age of 20 and seen children learning under tattered tin roofs. He clearly remembered the look in the eyes of a boy who asked, "Does the sky really belong to everyone?" That question has stayed with him for more than 20 years. And now, on a flight bearing the Falcon logo he created, he is still proving that, yes, the sky belongs to all of us. Nathaniel reached into the leather satchel beside his feet. Inside were project documents, a few memos, and a handwritten letter from a student in Kenya, written in a scrawl. "Thank you for helping us fly, Mr. Cross." He read the words again, breathing softly. For a moment, all the noise in the cabin seemed to fade away. He felt himself calm down until Amelia Rhodes' voice came over the speakers. "Steady but distant cabin crew. Prepare for takeoff." Nathaniel instinctively glanced across the aisle. Amelia was still making small talk with Richard Hale, the man who had bribed her moments ago. They avoided looking at Nathaniel, but the awkward movement was enough to tell him what had happened. He wasn't angry, he was just observing. Since entering the business world, Nathaniel has learned that true power lies not in having a louder voice, but in being able to silence others with the truth. And the truth always arrives on time. Another young flight attendant passed by a petite Asian girl with a name tag named Lin Chen, bowed slightly. "Would you like some coffee? Sir Black? No sugar. Thank you. Ong Jap." As she turned away, Nathaniel noticed something in her eyes. Not fear or pity, but a small, real flicker of sympathy. The plane lifted off. The landing gear scraped, and then it lifted off, weightless. The buildings below shrank like models, and the light reflected off the Falcon Air's steel wings, reminding Nathaniel of the wings of his youthful dreams, wings that belonged to no one, but to the belief that everyone had a place in the sky. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Amelia Rhodes stepped forward again, her voice still outwardly polite. "Sir, just confirming. You'll remain in this seat." "That's correct," Nathaniel replied briefly. "Very well," she said, but her eyes hardened when she met his calm gaze. In Amelia's world, Nathaniel's calmness is what makes her most uneasy. An angry person is easy to deal with, but a silent one is not. Nathaniel opened his notebook and jotted down a few words. He looked like a passenger preparing a speech, not someone who had just been publicly humiliated. A passenger sitting across the seat, Elena Brooks, a journalist for a society magazine, observed him discreetly. She saw that the man made no protest, no defense, no phone recording to prove his case. He just sat there, quiet, as if the whole thing had never happened. Elena. There's something about him Nathaniel didn't hear, but he felt the look. Sometimes, the truth doesn't need a hero to speak. It just needs an observer honest enough to tell it. In midair, the light coming through the window illuminated his face. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes revealed a sense of experience, but also a strange gentleness. He was the kind of man you wanted to sit next to during a storm because just looking at his calm, you would believe that everything would pass. A moment later, Nathaniel opened his laptop and wrote a few lines of email to Harper Quinn, his executive assistant at Falcon Air headquarters. Harper, initiate the internal audit system on Flight FZ301. Quietly, he didn't need to say more. Harper would understand internal audit meant that the entire crew's behavior would be recorded by the internal camera system. No one would escape the data. As he closed the computer lid, Nathaniel looked around the cabin. Richard Hale was still talking, his voice deep and commanding, his voice familiar and confident. Amelia stood nearby, nodding occasionally. He knew their type, believed that power was a matter of sitting at the front of the line, that it could buy anything, including respect. He had met many such people in his life, but today they would encounter something that money could not buy: dignity. Nathaniel sipped his coffee, the bitterness spreading on his tongue. He leaned back in his chair, inhaling deeply, letting his breath harmonize with the wind outside. No one in the cabin knew that. In the silence, a plan was being set in motion, not for revenge, but for enlightenment. Outside, the sky was open and endless, as if no prejudice had ever existed. But inside the cabin, an undercurrent was rising, and at the center of it was still the man sitting still in seat 1A, silent as if his silence was the answer to everything. Nathaniel closed his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. He thought of his father's words. Sometimes you just have to sit still and let people reveal themselves. And he knew this journey had only just begun. But then, when patience is tested and prejudice is pushed to the limit, the people who think they are the smallest begin to stand up. And it is from that moment that the real confrontation on Falcon Air Flight FZ301 begins. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed across the thick carpet of the first-class cabin. The previous calm was shattered when Amelia Rhodes returned, this time accompanied by Brian Keller, a tall assistant flight attendant with sharp eyes and the confident demeanor of someone used to giving orders. In his hand was a hastily printed sheet of paper, still smelling of fresh ink. Amelia stopped in front of seat 1A. Her face lost its calmness. Nathaniel looked up, his eyes calm, as if he knew what was coming. "Mr. Cross," she began, her voice even. "We've checked. There was an error in the reservation system. Seat 1A actually belongs to another passenger, Mr. Richard Hale. Here's the confirmation document." She placed the paper on the small table in front of him. Nathaniel glanced at it. The font was messy, the company logo was cut off, and the words "seat reassignment" were misprinted, not matching the official design. A forgery. "This is not a Falcon Air form," he said, his voice low, without a trace of tremor or anger. Brian Keller took a half step forward, his voice hard. "This is official. You'll need to comply so we can keep our schedule." Nathaniel put down the paper and took out his e-ticket from his pocket. The phone screen lit up clearly. "Seat 1A. First class, confirmed. My ticket is correct," he said slowly. "If there is a system error, it is not the passenger's fault." The atmosphere in the cabin was tense. The people around them began to listen. An elderly woman in row 2 leaned over, her eyes worried. A young man behind her shook his head slightly. But Richard Hale, who was sitting in the back row with the fake ticket, still kept a smirk on his face. He stood up, crossed his arms, and said with a hint of disdain, "Come on, man, you're holding everyone up. Just move to the back. Let's keep it civilized." Nathaniel turned to look. He said nothing for several seconds, just looked the man straight in the eye, a look that was calm, almost gentle, but made Richard blink, as if the silence itself were the strongest protest. Amelia interjected, "Trying to regain control, sir. Please understand. It's not personal. These things happen all the time. Impersonal." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. But why is it always the person who gets asked to leave who looks like me? The words were not raised, but they were enough to make several people in the cabin pause. A white man in row 3 bowed his head slightly, avoiding Nathaniel's eyes. Elena Brooks, a journalist, sitting in row 2B, quietly turned on her phone camera. She knew this moment would become evidence of something bigger. Amelia looked around, feeling the pressure of the gazes, but instead of backing away, she tensed as if her authority was being challenged. "Mr. Cross, I will have to ask you to cooperate. Otherwise, we will be forced to remove you from the plane." Brian took another step forward, his voice hard and cold. "Sir, please stand up." The air was thick, as if someone had just sucked all the oxygen out of the cabin. Nathaniel remained still. He hadn't shifted his position. The light from the window illuminated half of his face, leaving the other half in shadow, a perfect contrast of patience and restraint. "I will stand," he said, "when there is a good reason. For now, I think we should all sit down." The voice was not loud, but it carried weight. It was not a threat, nor a plea, just a natural command from someone used to making decisions. Brian paused. He glanced at Amelia, waiting for a signal. She swallowed, then lowered her voice. "Okay, if you don't cooperate, I'll have to tell the captain." Nathaniel nodded slightly. "Good, let's do that." Amelia turned away, but at that moment, the eyes of Lin Chen, the young American-Chinese flight attendant, accidentally met Nathaniel's. She didn't say anything, but there was a silent apology in her gaze. Nathaniel nodded slightly, as if he had forgiven her before she could feel guilty. The front compartment door closed behind Amelia. Murmurs rose across the row. Elena Brooks lowered her phone, her eyes thoughtful. A middle-aged man of Indian descent, Dr. Aaron Desai, whispered, "That's not right. They can't do that." Nathaniel turned and said softly, "It's all right." Sometimes silence says more than words. Not anger, but clarity. He understood every little action was being recorded, every gesture, every word, because at Falcon Air's San Francisco office, the internal audit command he had sent 10 minutes ago had been activated. Everything that was happening on Flight FZ301, from the images to the audio, was being stored live on the airline's internal servers. Behind, Richard Hale leaned back in his chair, sneering, "Unbelievable. First class isn't for everyone." Elena heard, her eyes turned cold. She turned on the recording mode. Sometimes, justice begins with a small button on the screen. About 5 minutes later, Amelia returned, her face more tense. "The captain has confirmed. We can arrange another seat for you, Mr. Cross, or you can wait for the next flight. The decision is yours." Nathaniel looked at the ticket in his hand, then up at her. "I choose to stay." Amelia stiffened. She had never heard a passenger say that so calmly. Nathaniel continued, "And if anyone wants to try to take this seat back, they can sit down and talk to me. Be polite." The air in the cabin froze. The previously silent passengers began to whisper. One woman whispered, "He's right." Another added, "That's discrimination." Amelia stepped back, trying to keep a stiff smile. "Enjoy your flight, sir." Nathaniel nodded slightly. "I intend to." When she left, Brian looked at him for another second, his eyes no longer as confident as before. Nathaniel sat back, calmly opening his notebook. He wrote a few short lines in black ink. Respect isn't requested, it's revealed. Outside, the sky was a deep blue. Inside, The smallest power was beginning to shift. One passenger was silent, but his every gesture made others look back at themselves, and somewhere at Falcon Air headquarters. The first data stream of Audit FZ301 began to roll on screens. A story of justice was about to begin right in this seemingly ordinary cabin. But justice, before it can be seen, always needs witnesses. And on that flight, 3 people who thought they were just outsiders started turning on their cameras, opening their hearts, and unwittingly became the most important links in the coming storm. The air in first class was thick, as if every breath had weight. Everyone was silent, that uncomfortable silence where everyone knows something is wrong, but no one dares to say anything. Then there was a soft click. It was the sound of a phone camera turning on. Elena Brooks, a veteran reporter for the Global Observer magazine, raised her head, her eyes sharp as knives. She didn't say anything, just raised her phone, pointing it straight at row 1A. The camera captured the image of Nathaniel Cross, a black man sitting quietly in his first-class seat, facing Amelia Rhodes and Brian Keller, 2 flight attendants who were trying to force him to leave his seat. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but journalistic experience told her if you turn your back on injustice, you've chosen the wrong side. "Ma'am, please put your phone away," Brian said, his voice a little harsh. Elena didn't move, "just doing what you should have done," she replied, her voice dry. The chatter in the cabin rose again. All eyes turned to the front. Across the row, a middle-aged man of Indian descent stood up. He wore a white shirt and glasses, and his demeanor was calm but firm. Dr. Aaron Desai, a cardiologist from Chicago, was not the type to meddle, but he had seen too many cases of system failure like this in his life. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough for the whole compartment to hear. "I'm a passenger here, and I've been watching from the start. That man has a valid ticket. He's done nothing wrong." Amelia turned around, a look of surprise flashing across her face, then quickly regained her professional composure. "Sir, please remain seated. We have procedures to follow." Aaron raised an eyebrow. Procedures or prejudice? There was a heavy silence. For the first time, Amelia's voice trembled. She turned away, avoiding the doctor's gaze. Meanwhile, Lin Chen, a young Chinese-American flight attendant, stood silently in the back. She saw everything, from Richard Hale handing Amelia money before boarding the plane, to the fake seat change paper hastily printed at the service counter. Her heart ached. Lynn knew that if she spoke up, she could lose her job, but if she remained silent, she would lose something more precious herself. She took a deep breath and stepped closer. "He has a valid ticket," she said, her voice low but clear. "I saw it myself. The system didn't make a mistake." The whole cabin froze. Nathaniel looked up, his eyes softening as he looked at the young girl. No thanks needed, just a nod, enough to let her know he understood. Amelia turned around, her eyes cold. "Stay in your lane. Trainee," she snapped, her voice high-pitched. The shout tore through the silence. Lynn was startled and took half a step back, but her eyes never left Nathaniel. Elena kept filming. The camera recorded every second, every frown, every glance. It was all being recorded, piece by piece. She knew that truth needed witnesses, and witnesses needed evidence. Dr. Desai took a step forward, his voice low and firm. "Miss Rhodes, I suggest you stop this before it gets worse. We're all witnesses here." Amelia smiled faintly, but that smile could not hide the worry creeping into the corners of her lips. "Doctor, this is an internal matter. Please don't escalate." "Too late," Elena said softly, her eyes still on the screen. "It's already escalating. Liv." From the back row, Richard Hale laughed. "You people love drama. Huh. Just move on. Let the crew do their job." His words made a few people frown. A middle-aged white woman in row 3 whispered to her husband, "That's not right. He paid for that seat." A young man shook his head. "Man, this is uncomfortable." Nathaniel remained silent. He had no need to speak. He understood that sometimes silence was the strongest action to let others reveal themselves. Ling Chen, despite being scolded, did not move from her position. She stood there, her hands clenched in front of her, her face red. In her mind, all the training she had received about obeying superiors was colliding with something deeper, her self-respect. Amelia turned back to Nathaniel, this time her voice as hard as steel. "Sir, this is your last warning. If you refuse to move, I'll have to call security on arrival." He looked up, his voice still calm. "You can call whoever you need, but make sure they bring the truth with them." The cabin was dead silent. Everyone could feel the line between right and wrong becoming clearer. "Doctor, desai nin Amelia. Noicham. Sometimes. Silence protects the guilty, but not today." Elena lowered the camera, turned to Lynn, and whispered, "Don't be scared. You did the right thing." Lynn pursed her lips and nodded slightly. For the first time, there was a ray of light in her eyes, of budding courage. From the cockpit, the captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. "This is your captain speaking. Please remain seated. We're handling a minor issue in the cabin. Minor issue. Elena Lamb." Bam! If only he knew. Nathaniel closed his eyes. He felt a thin breeze drift through the cracks in the window. Everything was happening as he had predicted, faster than he thought. He needed no hurry, for he knew that justice did not need to be shouted. It just needed to be seen. The first wave has risen, and with 3 strangers stepping up, justice has found its voice. But for those accustomed to living in privilege, being challenged is unacceptable. And just minutes later, the simmering confrontation on the Falcon Air Flight FZ301 would burst into flames as the arrogance of power collided with human dignity. The air in the cabin seemed to condense. Every eye followed Nathaniel Cross, the man who sat still in the midst of the impending storm. Not a word, not a frown. He just stared out the window, where the sunlight streamed down on the silver wings of Falcon Air. To others, the silence might have been weakness, but to him, it was a weapon. Amelia Rhodes was still standing in front of her, her hands clutching the fake seat change slip. She wanted to say something, but the rational excuses that had been running through her head suddenly fell apart when she met his gaze. There was something in his eyes that made her feel uncertain, as if this man was no ordinary passenger she could control with a few professional rules. In the other row, Elena Brooks continued to spin. Dr. Aaron Desai sat down, but his eyes were still fixed forward, ready to stand up at any moment. Lin Chen, the young flight attendant, bit her lip, her hands shaking slightly, but her eyes were still full of determination. Nathaniel took a deep breath. He opened the briefcase at his feet, took out his phone, pressed a few keys, and put it to his ear. A deep voice rang out on the other end of the line. Harper Quinn, his executive assistant at Falcon Air headquarters in San Francisco. "Harper," Nathaniel said slowly, Activate the internal audit protocol. On the other side. Harper was silent for a second, then replied in a professional, slightly deep voice. System live. Log feed running. Just 4 words, but like a secret order transmitted through the airline system. From that moment, every image, sound, and interaction on Flight FZ301 was recorded and transmitted live to the Falcon Air data center. Unknown to anyone on board, their entire actions were being recorded in an internal report, something that could decide the careers of many people in the next few hours. Nathaniel flipped the phone shut. He remained seated. No one heard the call, but he let his shoulders relax as if he had just made a long-considered decision. Amelia took a deep breath, trying to regain the initiative. "Sir, if you continue to refuse, we'll have to." Nathaniel interrupted, his voice calm but sharp as a knife. "Ms. Rhodes, I suggest you continue your work. I don't want to disrupt this flight any further." The words seemed gentle, but there was something about them that sent a shiver down both Amelia and Brian's spine. There was a power that didn't need to be shouted, just the certainty of someone who knew where they were and what they held. Richard Hale, from the back seat, interjected sarcastically, "Oh, so now he's making calls. What's next? Calling the president." Elena lowered the camera and turned to him. "Maybe you should just stop talking before you embarrass yourself further." The statement made a few passengers laugh. A short laugh, but enough to lighten the atmosphere in the cabin. Richard blushed and turned away. Meanwhile, Nathaniel bent down and opened the little book. He wrote a few lines in the slow handwriting. To keep calm is the strength of the man who knows that the truth is always on his side. Harper sent a confirmation message. Audit protocol active cabin 1A. Status recording. All crew communications live logged. Evidence chain verified. Nathaniel finished reading and smiled slightly. He put the phone down on the small table, his glass of lemonade still damp with dew. There was no need to prove anything, no need to argue. Justice was taking its course. Amelia retreated to the counter, pulling Brian with her. "She's losing control," Brian whispered. "Everyone's watching." "Keep quiet," Amelia replied, her voice tense. "We just have to wait until we land. No one's going to touch the crew." But just then, Lin Chen approached, her voice trembling. "Rhodes, maybe we should stop. The other passengers enough." Amelia interrupted. "Do you want to go home right after this flight?" Lin bit her lip, her eyes red. She turned away. But Nathaniel saw it all. In those eyes was the struggle he knew all too well, the struggle between right and fear. He spoke softly, loud enough for her to hear. "Sometimes, doing the right thing costs you, but silence costs more." That sentence made Lin stand still. She did not reply, but her trembling hands gradually clenched. In the cabin, a few people began to whisper. "Doctor." Desai quietly checked his phone and saw that the Falcon Air internal Wi-Fi network was still active. He sent a message to Elena. "Keep recording." "He's doing something." Elena nodded slightly, her eyes still fixed on Nathaniel. She sensed something strange. His calm was not passive. It was as if he was controlling everything, every step, every breath. At the Falcon Air office, Harper looked at the data screen. The text appeared, FZ301. In-flight irregularity detected. Source Nathaniel Cross. CEO confirmed presence on board. Is he testing the system? A technician asked quietly. "No," Harper replied, eyes never leaving the screen. "He's teaching the system what fairness is in the sky." Falcon Air glided through the white clouds. The sun reflected off the plane like a shining knife. Silent, but impossible to ignore. Nathaniel leaned back and closed his eyes. An image flashed through his mind. At 23, he, too, had been kicked out of a corporate boardroom for not looking good enough. Back then, he had chosen silence, but silence to build, not to endure. Today, he had chosen silence again, but the silence of someone in power who could change the outcome. Amelia glanced at her watch. Each minute felt like an hour. She had no idea that every word and action she said was being recorded, every frame clear down to every breath. Nathaniel opened his eyes and looked straight ahead. The sunlight fell on his face, illuminating his deep brown eyes. In that moment, he knew justice did not need to speak loudly. It just needed time to be heard, and that time has begun to count. But before justice could speak, old memories came flooding back, unhealed wounds from the past suddenly resurrected, recounting the journey of a man who was once rejected, and why today he chose silence instead of anger. The steady hum of the plane's engines faded into the dull background noise of the air. Nathaniel leaned his head back against the seat, his eyes closed. To outsiders, he might have been resting, but inside him, memories were replaying, a scene from more than 20 years ago, when the world first showed him the true face of prejudice. New York, the winter of his 23rd year. The snow was thick on the streets. The neon lights were blurred on the wet pavement. Nathaniel was a recent college graduate, carrying a letter of recommendation from Harvard and a cheap suitcase. He arrived at the Astoria Hotel, where he had booked a room for the most important interview of his life. The young man was full of hope, his worn shoes still shining from the morning polish he had done. As he approached the front desk, he smiled. "Hello, I'm Nathaniel Cross. I have a reservation under my name." The shift manager, a middle-aged white man, glanced at his name, then back at his face. His eyes paused for a second, and his smile faded. "Ah, sorry. There seems to be an error in the system. We have no more rooms available." Nathaniel frowned. "I booked a week in advance. Here's my confirmation." He handed over the email printout. The manager didn't look at it, just replied smoothly, "Sorry, sir. Our policy has changed, but there's a motel a few blocks away that might have rooms." Nathaniel looked over the manager's shoulder and saw a white couple behind the counter who had just been given their keys. They had arrived after him. He understood. The system error was not the computer's fault. He wanted to speak, wanted to react. But then he remembered what his father had said. "You don't need to shout to be heard. Just let them see, and then you will do something they don't expect." That night, Nathaniel slept in the train station lobby, using his coat as a blanket. He remembered the feeling of the cold floor on his back, the smell of burnt coffee at night, and the incessant train calls. In that cold, he vowed to himself one day, he would create something that no one could take away. Not power, but dignity. In the years that followed, Nathaniel worked tirelessly. From aeronautical engineer to investment advisor, he learned to understand the system, then sought to change it. He didn't want to destroy it. He wanted to rebuild it. And so, Falcon Air was born not just an airline, but a statement of fairness. Falcon Air's philosophy is printed in the very first training manual. No one is more worthy to serve than another. In the sky, all are equal, as he signed the papers to form the company. Nathaniel thought back to that night in New York, and he thought, If someone asked him, "Why are you starting an airline?" he would answer, "Because I was denied a room once. I just wanted to make sure no one else was standing outside the door." The slight rumble of the plane jolted him back to reality. Nathaniel opened his eyes, the light reflecting in his pupils like sunlight on water. Even after so many years, the memory lingered. It no longer hurt, but it reminded him why he had to stay calm today. Across the cabin, Amelia Rhodes was still whispering to Brian Keller, trying to salvage some of her authority. Nathaniel vaguely heard words like policy, discipline, chain of command. Those words reminded him of the hotel manager years ago, those who used rules as a cover for discrimination. Elena Brooks continued to silently record the video. Little did she know, the image of that man sitting quietly in the sky was a living testament to what she had always sought in journalism. The truth did not need to be noisy. It just needed someone patient enough to look. Lin Chen stood at the back of the cabin, her eyes red. She couldn't understand why someone as polite as Nathaniel was being treated like this, but looking at him, she also understood one thing sometimes. How people react is the biggest lesson. Nathaniel adjusted his tie and signed his name on a small piece of paper in his notebook. It was just a few simple lines, but it was the first line of the report Harper Quinn would receive when he landed. A report not just about a flight gone wrong, but about a system that needed to be changed. He remembers the face of the boy in Kenya who asked, "Does the sky belong to all of us?" "Sir." Then he replied, "Yes, but we have to work together to keep it fair." Now, when he looks out the airplane window, the sky is as blue as it was then. Only people have changed, and he, in silence, is helping the world relearn that lesson. A small ding sounded from the cabin system. Harper sent a short message, "System integrity verified, evidence secure." Nathaniel smiled slightly. Everything was in its place, even justice. But while he maintained his composure, outside, the shadows of prejudice were beginning to grow. One word on the loudspeaker, one wrong gesture, and a real storm was about to sweep through Cabin 1A of Falcon Air Flight FZ301. The loudspeaker dinged loudly in the otherwise silent first-class cabin. Amelia Rhodes's voice, cold and firm, echoed throughout the plane. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently dealing with a non-compliant passenger in seat 1A. Please remain seated and await further instructions from the crew." Each word was spoken slowly and clearly, but it felt like a knife. The air in the cabin froze instantly. Some passengers looked at each other. Some leaned down to whisper, and others tried to catch a glimpse of the person sitting in seat 1A. Nathaniel looked up. He was still sitting, his hands clasped lightly over his stomach, his face strangely calm. There was no fear in his deep brown eyes, just a look of weariness with the way the world had not changed despite his lifelong efforts to make it better. Elena Brooks jumped up from her seat, her voice so loud that the whole compartment could hear, "You're lying." All eyes were on her. He sat there the whole time, not doing anything. "I filmed the whole thing. If you dare say non-compliant, I will post this video as soon as the plane lands." Dr. Aaron Desai also stood up, his voice low but resonant. "This is outrageous. That man didn't even raise his voice. You're creating a false report." Amelia paused slightly. Her face changed color, but she still tried to keep her voice steady. "Sir, please take your seat. This is a safety matter." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "Safety or convenience?" The question dropped like a stone into a still lake. At the back of the cabin, Lin Chen stood next to the service counter, her hands shaking as she heard Brian Keller whisper, "Don't worry. We just need to write that he lost control and was acting threateningly. Security will handle the rest." "But he didn't do anything," Lin replied softly. Brian glanced at her, frowning. "Lin, listen, you've only been here for 3 months. Right? Trust me, in this industry, you don't want to go against your superiors." Lin looked around, then secretly turned on the recording mode on her phone and put it in her apron pocket. Brian's voice rang out clearly. Each word was nailed down. "We'll just say he was aggressive. Nobody will question it." Her heart pounded. She didn't dare look up, knowing only that she held something important in her hands, the first proof of the truth. Outside, the passengers began to chatter. A black passenger accused of being uncooperative. "I've heard that too many times," a man muttered. "I can't believe it still happens," the woman next to him replied. A boy of about 10 years old pulled his mother's hand and asked softly, "Mom, what did he do wrong?" The mother was silent. There was no easy answer to that question. Amelia tried to stay calm, but her face was red. She approached Nathaniel, her voice stiff. "Sir, please remain calm. We're following company protocol." Nathaniel looked up, his voice low and calm. "Are you sure, Miss Rhodes? Because I think you're doing the very thing this company was founded to fight against." Amelia hesitated. "What are you talking about?" "Falcon Air is built on one principle: respect above rank, respect above authority." He paused, then said softly, "You seem to have forgotten." The words were like a mirror, making Amelia unable to look straight. She swallowed and turned away. Meanwhile, Nathaniel remained seated, looking out the window. The afternoon light filtered through the clouds, illuminating his face, drawing a faint outline of calm. Elena continued to spin, this time turning to Lin. "Girl, you saw everything, right?" Lin looked around, then nodded slightly. I have the recording," she whispered. Elena smiled slightly. "Good. Keep it. Don't tell anyone. Doctor." Desai turned back to his chair and whispered to the person sitting next to him, "We are witnessing the truth being distorted in real time." Nathaniel smiled slightly. It was a small smile, not bitter, but the smile of someone who knew the outcome. He had seen it too many times in his life, people always trying to make up stories, because power was sometimes just a voice on a loudspeaker. In his mind, Harper Quinn was in the Falcon Air office, looking at the data recorder. She saw the report from the cabin crew conflict log initiated. She knew what that meant, and she also knew that every sound, including Amelia's, had been recorded from the moment Nathaniel activated the audit protocol in the sky. Falcon Air FZ301 still soared through the white clouds, but inside, the atmosphere was as heavy as burning iron. Every look, every word was being etched into the history of that airline and of the people on board. Amelia picked up the radio again and whispered, "Captain, we may need security on arrival." The captain replied, "Copy that." That short answer made Nathaniel let out a small sigh, not because he was afraid, but because he knew. People always choose the simplest way to deal with the truth, silence it. Elena looked at him and asked softly, "What will you do?" Nathaniel replied, his voice even and firm. "I don't need to do anything. The truth will speak for itself." In the corner, Lynn was still standing there, her hand touching her pocket, where her phone was recording every word. She could feel something changing, not just in the cabin, but within herself. The plane continued to fly through the sky, sunlight shining through the windows, illuminating each person's face, the scared, the brave, and one silent but determined man, whose name, in a few hours, the whole world would know. But sometimes, for justice to be served, there needs to be a moment of clarity where all the masks fall off. And it was in that tense moment that Falcon Air Flight FZ301 entered the storm of no return. The Falcon Air first-class cabin was filled with a tense, suffocating silence. Only the steady hum of the engines echoed, like the pounding heartbeats of hundreds of people witnessing something far more than a minor collision. Nathaniel remained seated in seat 1A, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his eyes unusually calm. Those eyes did not look at the person opposite him with defiance, but with the sadness of someone who had seen this too many times in his life. But Brian Keller was different. He had lost control. Maybe it was because of fear, or maybe it was because of pride. Under the pressure of dozens of passengers' gazes, Brian gritted his teeth and walked quickly. "Sir, I'm asking you to stand up now," he growled, his hand already reaching out as if to pull Nathaniel up. Before Nathaniel could reply, that rough hand grabbed his arm and squeezed hard. That gesture, even if it was only for a second, burned all the air in the cabin. The shout tore through the silence. "That's assault." Elena Brooks jumped up, her voice ringing like a bell, drawing all eyes to her. The camera was still in her hand, the lens pointed straight at Brian. "You just attacked a passenger. I filmed everything at that moment. Dr. Aaron Desai stepped forward, stepping between Brian and Nathaniel, his voice low but powerful. "That's enough. You're not allowed to touch him. He did nothing wrong." Brian was startled and took half a step back, but still tried to salvage the situation. This man is refusing to comply. Aaron interrupted comply with what he was just sitting in his seat. A buzz ran through the cabin. People began to talk, and then a few stood up. Elena turned back, her voice louder. "They're trying to force a legitimate passenger." Everyone saw it one by one. The whispers turned into waves. A middle-aged man stood up. "He has a valid ticket. I saw it clearly. No one is allowed to do that." An elderly woman continued. "We cannot be silent. Today it was him. Tomorrow it could be anyone." Then, suddenly, as if by an unspoken command, the passengers on both sides of the aisle stood up, forming a human chain. Dr. Desai was in the middle, Elena beside him, and behind him was a group of people of all colors and classes all turned toward Nathaniel Cross. The shouts rang out, at first intermittent, then strong as the sound of waves. "Let him stay. Let him stay." The sound echoed off the cabin walls, through the speakers, and throughout the plane. Amelia Rhodes, who had been trying to maintain her composure, paled. She understood that the situation had spiraled out of control. It was no longer just a passenger flight attendant conflict, it was a genuine uprising. "Brian, stop," she shouted, her voice shaking, but it was too late. Elena's camera had captured the scene, Brian's hand squeezing Nathaniel's arm, the passengers rising up in protest, and the moment the system's pride was ripped apart in public view, Ling Chen at the back of the compartment was almost in tears. She clutched her phone tightly in her hand, where Brian's voice recording was still playing. She knew This was the evidence, the thing that would save the truth from being distorted. Nathaniel reached out and touched Aaron's shoulder. "Thank you, Doctor, but let me handle this." His voice was soft but resonant. He stood up slowly, his movements commanding attention. No one understood how someone who had just been humiliated could appear so calm. He turned to Amelia, speaking almost as a reminder. "You know what? The worst thing about power, Miss Rhodes, it's not abusing it, but thinking you have the right to do it." The words made Amelia choke, her eyes widening. Elena didn't take her eyes off the camera. Aaron stood next to Nathaniel, as if ready to protect him to the end. A few others also stepped forward, shielding Nathaniel and Brian. Nathaniel looked around at every face, at every eye. He saw anger, fear, and faith. A white woman in the third row shouted, "He has as much right to be here as any of us." The cry of "Let him stay" rose again, stronger than before. Amelia trembled with the walkie-talkie in her hand, but could not speak. Every time she tried to give orders, the looks from the passengers made her unable to open her mouth. In the Falcon Air office, Harper Quinn watched the monitor, watching it all from the intercom. The data was being saved live to the server, second by second, frame by frame. She knew that if Nathaniel gave the signal, everything would be made public, but he didn't. He just stood there, surrounded by strangers who had chosen justice over silence. And in that moment, he realized Falcon Air, the airline of justice, was no longer just his dream. It was living, breathing, right here in this cabin. A baby cried softly in the back row, then faded as its mother gently soothed it. A strange silence fell again, a silence not of fear, but of expectation. Nathaniel looked straight at Brian, his voice low but firm. "You should return to your post. This flight is not over, but your future may be." Brian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Sweat rolled down his temples. He looked around. Everyone was on Nathaniel's side. Even Amelia bowed her head, avoiding his gaze. A passenger behind him clapped. Then 2, then 10. The clapping echoed through the cabin, each clapping loud and clear, carrying relief, empathy, and a wordless message enough. Nathaniel did not smile. He just nodded slightly, as if in greeting to the people who had just stood up for what was right. But when the truth began to be seen, it could no longer be hidden. And in that moment, when all eyes were on him, Nathaniel decided to reveal the unexpected, the true identity of the man they had just protected. The air in the cabin was so thick it could have been cut. Everyone stood there, forming an invisible barrier around Nathaniel. Brian Keller backed away, his face white, and Amelia Rhodes stood motionless, as if she had just realized she had gone too far. Nathaniel looked around, his voice low and calm. "Every moment of this flight is being recorded. Your every word, your every action is in the system. You are being monitored." The sound wasn't loud, but it echoed in the cabin like a verdict. Elena lowered the camera, her eyes wide open. Lin Chen trembled slightly, but her heart was filled with hope because she knew Nathaniel was telling the truth. Amelia turned pale, her voice faltering. "What? What did you say?" "What system?" Nathaniel turned around, his eyes calm and cold. "Falcon Air's internal monitoring system. I activated it the moment you tried to change my seat. From that moment on, all actions of this crew were sent directly to headquarters." The whole cabin was dead silent. Brian opened his mouth, trying to find an excuse. That's the company's business. You can't. Nathaniel interrupted. You might want to check the privacy policy you signed when you joined. Article 17, Section C. Internal Integrity Recording Protocol. Amelia took a step back, her hand holding the walkie-talkie shaking. She understood. The man she was trying to humiliate wasn't just a first-class passenger, he was the system behind. Lin Chen took a deep breath, then stepped forward, her voice small but clear. I have the recording. I recorded Brian saying we were going to lie that he was aggressive. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. The sound, clear and trembling, echoed through the cabin. All the passengers turned to look at her. Brian widened his eyes. What are you doing? Lynn, do you want to ruin your career? She shook her head, eyes filled with tears but determined. I just want to do the right thing. I didn't get into this business to hide the truth. Elena quickly turned the camera towards Lynn and said loudly, Can you play that recording? People need to hear it. Lynn opened the phone. Brian's voice rang out clearly in the quiet cabin. We'll just say he was aggressive. Nobody will question it. Everything seemed to explode. The passengers were in an uproar, gasping for breath, and some people were cursing indignantly. Brian backed away, his face red, and Amelia could only stammer. It was just a misunderstanding. Elena looked at her, her voice cold. She's not mistaken. She's part of the problem. Nathaniel took a step forward, his voice low but resonant. I don't need to say more. But if you really believe you're doing the right thing, then be prepared to defend yourself before Falcon Air's disciplinary board. Amelia's shoulders slumped. Brian bowed his head, sweat dripping onto the floor. At that moment, Elena received a signal on her phone. She turned to Nathaniel. Do you mind if I live stream this to Falcon Air's internal channel? They need to see what's happening. Nathaniel nodded slightly. Elena pressed the Go Live button. The screen displayed the words Broadcasting to Falcon Air Media Channel, Internal Staff Network. Thousands of employees at the headquarters, from pilots to ground staff, began to watch. The image of the cramped first-class cabin appeared, and the black man standing in the middle of the crowd. No anger, no resentment, just a terrifying calm. Nathaniel looked straight into the lens. This is not a story about an individual. This is a story about a system where power is misused and dignity is disregarded. I'm not speaking out for myself, but for those who have been treated like I was, and for those who are silent today who may be victims tomorrow. The whole cabin was silent. Some passengers started to cry. Lin Chen clenched her hands, tears streaming down her face, but she did not wipe them away. On the other end of the line, Harper Quinn in the Falcon Air office watched the live stream, her voice echoing through her headset. Signal clear. All personnel are monitoring. What do you want me to do next? Nathaniel replied slowly. Nothing. Let them see for themselves. Elena held the camera steady, capturing every detail Amelia's blank face, Brian's desperate bow, and Nathaniel's calm eyes. In the cabin, a middle-aged white passenger spoke in a trembling voice. I used to stay silent when I saw something like this. Today, I am ashamed of it. Applause broke out. First one person, then two, then the whole compartment stood up. They didn't shout, just clapped slow, steady, as if thanking the man before them. Nathaniel bowed his head slightly, then spoke softly, enough for Elena to pick up the sound. Sometimes, the truth just needs to be seen. That's enough. But the truth, once revealed, always has consequences, and in a few minutes, Nathaniel Cross would make himself known to the world, not with power, but with 3 words that silenced the cabin. The Falcon Air first-class cabin still echoed with the sound of unfinished applause. The soft afternoon light shone through the windows, illuminating the calm face of Nathaniel Cross, the man who had just caused the entire power structure on this flight to crack with just a word and silence. He stood up, slowly and surely, without invitation, without proof. His composure made people step back, make way. Nathaniel looked around. Every face Amelia Rhodes, Brian Keller, Richard Hale all waiting for him to say something, but no one was ready for what was coming. His voice was deep and clear, not high, but carried farther than any loudspeaker on the plane. "I think it's time you know who I am." He paused, looking straight at Amelia, her eyes lost, her lip trembling slightly. "My name is Nathaniel Cross. I am the founder and CEO of Falcon Air." 1 second, 2 seconds, then absolute silence. The sound of the engine became distant, as if it was pulled out of this space. The whole cabin stood still. No one moved. Elena stopped spinning. Lin Chen's mouth was open. Brian and Amelia were frozen. It was Amelia who lost her composure first. You're joking, right?" Her voice was hoarse, trembling as if she were trying to cling to something absurd. Nathaniel didn't reply. He took out a thin metal card from his pocket, engraved with the Falcon Air Wings logo and the words Nathaniel Cross, founder and CEO. He placed it gently on the service desk in the middle of the cabin, the metal reflecting light, making everyone hold their breath. Richard Hale, the rich white man who had slipped $500 into Amelia's hand, paled. He stepped back, his voice cracking. "Wait, you're the CEO." Nathaniel turned to look at him, his voice not harsh, only frighteningly calm. "Yes, I am. And I am the man you think you can buy with $500. Richard's face turned red, then pale. The hand holding the wine glass trembled, falling to the floor and shattering. Amelia gasped, trying to say, "Sir, I didn't know you were." Nathaniel spoke softly, but his words almost made her collapse. "If I weren't the CEO, would you treat me differently?" A wave of shame swept over Amelia. She bowed her head, unable to say another word. Brian stood frozen, his lips moving, but no sound came out. Elena looked at the scene before her, then raised her camera, recording that historic moment, not to expose the scandal, but to preserve the image of a man who chose justice with wisdom over anger. Dr. Aaron Desai stepped forward, his voice deep and warm. "Cross, I've flown many times in my life, but I've never seen anyone keep as calm as you." Nathaniel smiled softly. "Sometimes, keeping silent is the only way to make others listen." He turned to Lin Chen, his eyes gentle. "You did well. Your courage will be appreciated." Lin bowed her head, tears welling up in her eyes. She never thought that the man she was trying to protect with the recording would be the top leader of her company. Nathaniel looked around the cabin, his voice ringing out again, clearer, as if speaking to everyone present, and those watching the live stream at headquarters today. "I stand here not as a CEO, but as a passenger, a human being. I want to reiterate one thing: Falcon Air was not created to sell first-class seats, but to remind the world that everyone deserves respect, no matter where they sit." The cabin fell silent. A few people shed tears, inside Falcon Air's San Francisco office, hundreds of employees watching the live stream stood still. Many had never heard their CEO speak so calmly and powerfully. Richard Hale bowed his head, his voice hoarse. "Mr. Cross, I am truly sorry. I didn't know," Nathaniel replied softly, not at all cold. "Sometimes. It's not because you don't know. It's because you never thought you needed to know." That sentence, short, but like a mirror reflecting the conscience of everyone on board. A white woman in row 3 burst into tears. "It's so strange," she said softly. "I fly Falcon Air because I think it's safe and luxurious. Today I realized the most valuable thing is not the seat, but the people." Nathaniel nodded, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Exactly. The sky's wide, but human dignity is even wider." Elena lowered the camera, her eyes welling with tears. She knew she had just witnessed one of those rare moments in life where power doesn't need a demonstration, but a single word to redefine justice. The sound of the plane's engines was steady, but the feeling inside was different. The people who had been scared and angry a moment ago were now silent, not because they were embarrassed, but because they were rethinking. Nathaniel looked around, his eyes stopping at the window, where the sunset was beginning to filter through the clouds. He spoke softly, as if to himself. Sometimes justice doesn't need to come to a court. It just needs to be shown in the sky, but justice, once it has been served, must be served. And just minutes later, Nathaniel Cross, as founder of Falcon Air, would make a decision that neither crew nor passengers would ever forget. Nathaniel stood still in the middle of the first-class cabin, his eyes as still as a lake after a storm. The air was so thick and heavy that no one was afraid to breathe too loudly to break the silence. They knew what was about to happen would be the end and the beginning of a whole new chapter. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. A small beep sounded, and the voice of Harper Quinn, an executive assistant at Falcon Air headquarters, came through the earpiece. "Harper here." Nathaniel spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "Patch me through to Evelyn Drake." The other side paused for half a second. Then Harper replied, "Copy that, sir. Patching now." Everyone in the cabin looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. Some passengers whispered, "Evelyn Drake." "Who is she?" Seconds later, a female voice rang out, warm but authoritative. "Evelyn Drake, chairman of the board of Falcon Air, second only to Nathaniel in the airline's power structure. You're clear to proceed. Nathaniel." Her voice was short and decisive, like a key that unlocked the irreversible. Nathaniel nodded slightly, then turned off the speakerphone and switched it to public mode. He looked around the cabin where the eyes of confusion, fear, and regret still lingered. His voice rang out, calm but firm. "By virtue of my authority as CEO of Falcon Air, I hereby announce that Amelia Rhodes and Brian Keller are hereby terminated effective immediately, along with all others who were complicit in this incident." The cabin exploded in deadly silence. No response, no excuse. Amelia sank into her seat, covering her face with her hands. Brian stood rooted to the spot, eyes wide, unable to believe what he had just heard. Nathaniel continued, his voice still soft but leaving no room for negotiation. "Reason, serious violation of passenger rules, discriminatory behavior, and damage to Falcon Air's core value, respect above all." He paused, letting the words sink in. A few passengers nodded, others clapped, small but powerful. Elena Brooks, still holding the camera, lowered the lens. In the pale yellow light, She saw that Nathaniel's face held no gloating, not revenge. Just one thing: justice, simple and cold. Amelia tried to speak, her voice broken. I have served the company for nearly 10 years. I have never. Nathaniel looked at her, his eyes no longer angry, only sad. I believe you were once a good person, Amelia, but power makes you forget the most important thing. Every passenger is human, and sadly, today you let yourself be blinded by your own seat. Amelia choked up, tears falling onto her uniform, joining the sighs of the people around her. Nathaniel turned to Brian, who was still standing stiff as a statue. You are younger. You have a chance to learn again. But to learn, you must lose what you think is power. Brian bowed his head, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry, sir. I'm truly remorseful. Nathaniel replied softly. I don't need an apology. I need a change. From the headset, Harper's voice rang out again. Sir, HR has taken note. The dismissal is effective immediately. Their security clearance will be suspended upon landing. Nathaniel nodded and disconnected. He turned back to the passengers, a small smile on his face, not of victory, but of someone who had just had a stone lifted from his heart. I apologize for what you witnessed today. No one deserves to go through that, especially when flying Falcon Air. I promise it will never happen again. A middle-aged white woman said loudly, You don't need to apologize, Mr. Cross. You showed us why your firm is different. The applause was loud and genuine. Elena looked around. No more racial distinctions, no more class lines, just people united by the right action. Amelia raised her head, took one last look at Nathaniel, then quietly removed her name tag from her shirt and placed it on the table. Brian followed suit, his hands shaking. No one shooed them away. No one scolded. The sentence was severe enough, for it was delivered with absolute calm. Nathaniel watched them leave for the back deck, then turned back, his gaze fixed out the window, where the sunset was dyeing the sky crimson. He spoke softly, as if to himself, but enough for Elena to catch on camera in the sky. Everyone is equal. It is only when we forget that we fall. The plane was dead silent. Some people bowed their heads, some smiled. Lin Chen gently wiped away her tears, a belief suddenly rising in her heart that there were powerful people who still retained their humanity. Elena lowered the camera and said softly, It's not just a story about a flight, Mr. Cross. It's a lesson in self-respect. Nathaniel smiled and replied, Not mine. Elena, it's all ours, but every action has an impact. And when the flight landed in Cape Town, what Nathaniel Cross had done would not only change Falcon Air, it would change the world in how it treats others. As the sky outside the window gradually turned a deep purple, the first-class cabin of Falcon Air Flight FZ301 was no longer a mere luxury space. It was more like a courthouse suspended in the clouds where justice did not require a hammer, but only a person brave enough to do what was right. Nathaniel Cross remained seated in seat 1A, unperturbed, not because he wanted to appear powerful, but because he was considering his next move, the one that would determine the message Falcon Air would leave to the world. He turned to the back of the cabin, where Lin Chen was still standing silently, her eyes red. The young girl, in a simple uniform, was the first to dare to speak up when everyone else fell silent. Nathaniel knew well justice was not just about punishment, but also about recognition. He called softly, Lin, come here. She walked over, her hands still shaken, head bowed. Yes, Mr. Cross. Nathaniel looked straight at her, his voice soft but firm. I reviewed all the system logs. You were the only one on the flight crew who did the right thing, even though it could cost you your job. She replied, her voice so low that one had to lean in to hear. I just thought, if I stay silent, then I'm no different from them. Nathaniel nodded, his eyes shining with rare pride. Falcon Air needs people like you. Effective now. You are appointed Associate Flight Supervisor. This is official. The cabin exploded with applause. Elena Brooks put down her camera, smiling brightly. Dr. Aaron Desai stood up and said loudly, "She deserves it." Lynn was stunned, tears rolling down her cheeks. She quickly said, "Mr. Cross, I don't have enough experience." Nathaniel replied gently, "Experience can be learned, but character cannot. Today, you have proven that you have something that many people cannot have in their entire life." Lynn bowed her head, trying to hold back her sobs. A few passengers stood up to shake her hand. Some even hugged her tightly. In that atmosphere, all distances between rank, skin color, and nationality seemed to disappear. Nathaniel turned to Richard Hale, who was still sitting stiffly in the right-hand seat, his face pale. He looked around, as if hoping this was just a nightmare, but the truth was there naked and undeniable. Nathaniel spoke slowly, each word heavier than air. "As for you, Mr. Hale, Falcon, Air cannot allow a passenger who bribes and insults our staff and other passengers to continue using our services." Richard opened his mouth, his voice trembling. "Cross, I was wrong. I will pay the fine." Nathaniel interrupted. "No amount of money can buy respect. As of today, you are permanently banned from flying on the entire Falcon Air network." Murmurs spread throughout the cabin. A few people looked at Richard with a mixture of pity and contempt. He bowed his head, knowing that his reputation as a big investor had been completely shattered. Elena, as a journalist, still kept the camera on, but this time she spoke softly, almost in a narrative tone. It is rare that justice does not need a court, but only one person who dares to speak out. Nathaniel did not reply. He only looked out the window, where the last rays of dusk stretched like the horizon of a new day. In the cabin, passengers began to stand up, one by one, and then clap in unison. At first, it was a few isolated claps, then a steady rhythm, no one giving orders, no one initiating them, just a natural consensus of people who had just witnessed something right. Lin Chen wiped her tears and bowed her head slightly to thank him. "Doctor," Desai smiled gently. "Girl, today you not only saved a passenger, but also saved the soul of this entire airline." Lin replied softly, her voice still trembling. "I just do what my heart tells me to do." Nathaniel heard that and smiled slightly. He stood up, his warm voice echoing throughout the cabin. "I believe that from today, Falcon Air will be known not only for luxury, but for kindness. Because justice is not just about punishment, it is also about rewarding courage." Elena looked around. The cabin was now like a courtroom in the clouds. There was no judge, no lawyers, but there was a verdict, and most of all, there was justice. Harper from the Falcon Air office sent a message that appeared on the cabin screen. "Sir, the news from the internal system is spreading all over the network. Global staff are sharing the live stream. The hashtag Sky Justice is trending." Nathaniel looked at the words and nodded slightly. He knew that today's story would be talked about for a long time, not because he was the CEO, but because it proved that even in the sky, where people thought they were freest, there was a need for justice. Elena turned off the camera, approached him, and said softly, "You know, Mr. Cross, I used to think justice was a luxury. But today, you made me believe that it can start with just one person standing up." Nathaniel replied with a gentle smile. And if just one more person believed that, the world would change. Outside the window, the lights of Cape Town began to appear in the distance. The captain announced a descent, but inside everyone felt as if they had flown higher than ever, not because of the altitude, but because of the renewed confidence. But when justice is done, the echoes are sometimes stronger than the sentence itself, and it was only when Nathaniel Cross landed that he understood that the lesson of the day was not just for them, but for himself. The sound of the plane's tires touching down on the Cape Town runway was heavy and liberating. Outside, the afternoon light streamed through the windows, a pale yellow and warm, as if closing a stormy chapter. But inside the cabin, the silence was short-lived, for there was a truth yet to be told. Nathaniel unbuckled his seat belt and stood up, intending to leave his seat to greet the passengers. But before he could say thank you, Brian Keller, the recently fired assistant flight attendant, took a few steps forward, his eyes red and his voice trembling. "Cross, I have something to say." The whole compartment turned. Some were surprised, some were wary. Amelia Rhodes sat in the back row, head bowed, silent. Nathaniel nodded, signaling Brian to continue. Brian swallowed, took a deep breath, as if gathering all his remaining courage. "It's not just my fault or Amelia's, sir. We're trained that way." Nathaniel frowned, his voice still soft but sharp. "What does this training mean?" Brian looked down at the floor, his shoulders shaking. "I didn't mean to say it, but if I kept quiet, I would be no different from them. We were taught to judge passengers by their appearance, how they dressed, their skin color, their attitude. They call it passenger profiling policy." The cabin was dead silent, the soft intakes of breath, interspersed with a few gasps from the passengers, could be heard. Elena Brooks, the journalist, raised her camera again, not because it was her job, but because her conscience told her that this needed to be confirmed. Nathaniel looked at Brian, his eyes not angry but filled with deep disappointment. "Are you saying that policy is official Falcon Air procedure?" Brian nodded, his voice choked. "Yes, sir. It started with internal training. They told us to identify high-risk passengers, and they meant anyone who didn't look appropriate for first class. People of color, people who dressed modestly, people with accents were all considered extra consideration." Elena turned the phone and whispered to Dr. Desai, "My God, this is no longer an individual failure. This is a systemic disease." Nathaniel closed his eyes for a few seconds. He remembered himself 20 years earlier, the black boy who had been turned away from a room because he didn't look like someone with money. It turned out that the very thing he had run away from was still there, in the very company he had built to fight it. When he opened his eyes, the look was no longer calm, but a promise. Nathaniel picked up the phone and dialed a number. Harper Quinn's voice came quickly. "Harper here, sir. Connect with Evelyn Drake and the entire executive team. Initiate internal audit. Maximum level. System-wide. Sir, system-wide. I want to audit all flights for the past 5 years." Harper was silent for a second, then replied, "Yes, "Sir, understood." Nathaniel returned to the cabin, his voice low but clear. "If Falcon Air is truly rotten, we have to cut it open, no matter how painful it is. I didn't build this to be a racist empire, but to prove that fairness can fly." A round of applause broke out, this time not from those who wanted to cheer, but from those who sympathized. Elena looked at Nathaniel, her eyes filled with admiration and sadness. "You're not just dealing with the system, Mr. Cross. You're dealing with history." Nathaniel replied with a faint smile. "And we don't start today." When Brian bowed his head, tears falling to the floor. "Thank you for not only punishing me, but also listening to me." Nathaniel looked at him, his voice softening. "You made a mistake, but today you did the right thing. Remember this feeling, the feeling of being told the truth. It will save you more times in your life than you can imagine." The whole cabin was silent with emotion. The heavy atmosphere from before was replaced by another feeling more genuine, more profound. Lin Chen sat in the next row and said softly, "If they were trained like that, how many people would have been treated unfairly without ever knowing why?" Elena turned and softly replied, "Thousands. But today, at least one person dared to speak out, and if just one person starts, the whole wall will crack." Nathaniel stood still, listening. In that moment, he felt clearly what his father had said. True justice never makes noise. It only requires one man to admit wrong. He walked slowly to the front of the cabin, took the flight attendant's microphone. His voice echoed throughout the plane, deep and warm like an oath. "Dear passengers, I do not promise that Falcon Air will be perfect, but I promise that, from this moment on, any discrimination, no matter how small, will be eliminated. Because if the sky is big enough for everyone, then so must the human heart." The applause rang out again, louder, longer, and this time no one held back their tears. An old man in the back row said softly, "I used to think no one would dare to do what you do. Now I believe there are people who still retain the spirit of justice." Nathaniel bowed his head slightly in thanks, his eyes glinting in the light from the window. Cape Town was clearly visible below, but the flight was somehow not over yet. And as the first rays of Cape Town sunlight touched the wings of Falcon Air, Nathaniel knew it was time to begin real change. A journey that would not only change the airline, but also change the way people see each other. 3 days after the flight, news of the incident in the sky spread around the world. The image of Nathaniel Cross standing calmly in the middle of the first-class cabin, his voice ringing out in the sky, "All men are equal," became the most quoted quote on social media. Falcon Air is no longer an airline, it's become an icon. But for Nathaniel, fame isn't a destination, it's a responsibility. He sat in a large conference room at the San Francisco headquarters, surrounded by board members and senior executives. Dozens of newspaper articles, emails from passengers, and apologies from partners were piled on the table. Evelyn Drake, the chairwoman of the board, looked at him. Her voice calmed Nathaniel. "I have never seen a media storm as powerful and humane as this. But how do you plan to handle it?" Nathaniel was silent for a few seconds. He knew that today's words would shape the future of Falcon Air. We can't just say sorry. We have to change, really change. He stood up and projected a slide onto the big screen. The title appeared Equity in the Sky Initiative. We will start this program immediately. All employees, from pilots to ground staff, will be retrained. Not just on passenger rules, but on awareness, on respect, on fairness. A financial director frowned. That would cost a lot of money, Nathaniel, and could disrupt global operations. Nathaniel replied immediately, his voice not loud, but making the whole room silent. If justice has a price, I am willing to pay it, for nothing is more expensive than letting an innocent man be humiliated in our skies. Evelyn nodded slightly. There was a glint in her eyes, a mixture of trust and pride. So, who are you going to choose to lead this program? Nathaniel smiled slightly. I already have someone in mind. He pulled out a file and opened it in front of everyone. On it was a picture of Lin Chen, a petite girl in a flight attendant uniform. Lin Chen, the only one who dares to speak up when everyone is silent. I want her to be the director of passenger advocacy. The conference room was dead silent. A few people looked at each other, clearly surprised. An older member spoke cautiously. She's only 29. Nathaniel, she's never held a management position before. Nathaniel turned back, his gaze no longer one of demand but of unshakable conviction, because she hasn't been worn down by the system. She still has that sense of pain when she sees injustice. That's what we're missing. No one said another word. The decision was passed, quietly but with weight. 3 days later, Falcon Air's global announcement was released. The opening line was simple yet powerful. Falcon Air apologizes, not for reputation, but for conscience, and we will take action. On television, Nathaniel appeared at an international press conference. He did not use flowery words, did not blame anyone. He simply said, a system is only as good as its ability to correct itself. Today, Falcon Air chooses to relearn how to be a human being before becoming an airline. Behind him, Lin Chen stepped out, wearing a light gray suit, his face both solemn and emotional. Cameras flashed continuously. A reporter asked, "Are you afraid that this position is too big for a young person like you?" Lin replied, her voice small but firm, "I'm not afraid of power. I'm only afraid of silence." The entire auditorium rose to its feet and applauded. The image was reverberated around the world. A Chinese girl who had once been yelled at to stay in your lane now stood in the international spotlight, representing the forgotten passengers. A month later, the Equity in the Sky initiative began. More than 20,000 Falcon Air employees attended training sessions. They learned how to communicate, how to handle conflict, and, most importantly, how to see people beyond the color of their skin or what they wear. Internal videos of white pilots shaking hands with black staff or Asian flight attendants leading training sessions for regional managers quickly went viral. The world called it the Falcon Reform. In a television interview, Elena Brooks was asked about the incident. She smiled and said slowly, justice doesn't begin when someone gets fired. It begins when someone admits a mistake and turns that mistake into an opportunity to make the world a better place. As for Nathaniel, he comes to the office early every day. He doesn't talk much about the past of Flight FZ301 anymore. For him, it's no longer a wound, but a reminder. On his desk, he keeps a framed photo, a photo of Lin Chen at her appointment, her eyes bright and full of confidence. Beneath it is a line he wrote by hand. Justice doesn't shout. It reforms. The story of Falcon Air has become textbook material at many business schools. It is not just about how the company overcame the crisis, but about how one man, Nathaniel Cross, chose to confront injustice with wisdom rather than anger. 3 months later, with Falcon Air now a symbol of change, Nathaniel was sitting in seat 1A, where it all began. But this time, there was something different. There was no doubt in his eyes, no distance. There was just a small smile and a renewed faith. Morning light streamed through the first-class windows. The first rays of sunlight reflected off the polished wooden tabletop and cast a soft glow on Nathaniel Cross's calm face. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and savored the scent of hot coffee mixed with the scent of wood and metal in the air. The plane shuddered as it lifted off the runway, carrying hundreds of people into the sky, a sky that had been the scene of a moral storm 3 months earlier. But today, the sky's more peaceful than ever. Nathaniel opened his eyes and looked out the window. Below, the clouds were white like thin silk. He smiled suddenly, a small smile, as if he had just been released. It had been a long time since he had felt so light. No more suppressed anger, no more questions about why they treated him like this. Just a simple feeling things were finally going right. On the new Falcon Air aircraft, the familiar silver bird logo has been replaced by a new logo. 2 intertwined wings, one black, one white, curved as if flying in the wind. Beneath the logo is the slogan, "Equity in the Sky." Nathaniel saw it as he boarded the plane and couldn't help but nod. It wasn't just an image, it was a testament to a new chapter, where everyone, no matter where they came from, had a place in the world. A young voice rang out beside him. "Excuse me, sir, are you the guy from the video?" Nathaniel turned. Standing before him was a boy of about 12, dark-skinned, eyes sparkling with the curiosity of the world. He wore a Falcon Air bomber jacket that was too big for his small frame, and he held a notebook filled with drawings of airplanes. Nathaniel chuckled and asked again, "What video are you talking about?" The boy tilted his head, hesitant but full of excitement. "That video where you stood up and said, everyone deserves the sky. My mom plays it all the time. She says it's because of you that I can dream of becoming a pilot, even though I'm not like them." The words sent a wave of warmth through Nathaniel's heart. He looked at the boy, his eyes gentler than ever. "What's your name, Miles, sir?" "Miles Carter. Miles," Nathaniel repeated, as if to engrave his name into memory. "You know, when I was your age, I was rejected from aviation class just because I wasn't role model enough." The boy raised his head, surprised. "Really? But you're the CEO now." Nathaniel smiled. "That's true, but becoming CEO was never my goal. My real goal was to make sure kids like you never have to hear you're not cut out for this job again." Miles pursed his lips, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. Nathaniel slowly pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a multicolored wing badge, blue, silver, and purple, gleaming softly in the sunlight. "Do you know what this is? A pilot badge?" "Not really." Nathaniel placed the badge in his hand. "This is Falcon Air's new symbol of unity. We give it to those who believe that no one should be judged by their appearance. And today, I think the most worthy person to receive it is you." The boy's eyes widened. He took it tremblingly, his voice choked. I really got accepted." Nathaniel nodded, his gaze warm. "Yes, and one day," he gently placed his hand on his shoulder, "you will sit here, right here, seat 1A. But when you do, I hope you will use that position to lift others up, not push them down." Miles smiled brightly, then hugged him unexpectedly. At that moment, several passengers nearby turned and smiled. A flight attendant walked by, stopped, her eyes sparkling with pride. It was Lin Chen, now the Director of Passenger Advocacy. She said softly, "That first badge. He was the one who approved the design." Nathaniel looked at her and smiled. "And you're the one who made it happen." Lynn nodded, her eyes wet. "Not me, sir. It's us, the whole firm, the whole people who believe that fairness is not a slogan, it's an action." Nathaniel nodded. He looked around the cabin where once there had been insults. Now there was peace. An elderly white woman chatted happily with an African-American family. Two Asian passengers laughed as they helped an elderly man with his suitcase. There were no boundaries anymore. It wasn't just first class. It was the epitome of a world Nathaniel had always believed in. A world that was fair, simple, yet high enough to touch the sky. The flight continued. Miles returned to his seat, clutching his badge. Before leaving, he turned back and said loudly, "I promise, Uncle Nathaniel, one day I will fly with you." Nathaniel laughed and raised his hand in greeting. "I'll keep you to your word, Captain Miles." The whole cabin laughed, and as the laughter mingled with the smooth hum of the engines, Nathaniel leaned back in his seat. Outside, the sunlight filtered through the clouds, reflecting off the new paint job of the logo two intertwined wings, shimmering like the beat of hope. He closed his eyes. In his mind, an image of his late father appeared, the one who had said, "Son, the world will try to make you believe that you do not belong in the sky, but never believe it." Now, he understands that he has done it not just for himself, but for a generation of other Miles. But then, as the sunset light covered the wings of the plane, Nathaniel realized all journeys of justice have an end, but not of kindness, because what he left behind today was only the beginning. 3 months later, the Falcon Air office in San Francisco was flooded with envelopes and packages. Not contracts or partnership papers, but handwritten letters. Thousands of letters from all over the world, written in every language, in crooked or neat handwriting, all saying the same thing: gratitude. Nathaniel Cross sat alone in his glass-enclosed room on the 38th floor, the early morning light streaming in through the window and onto his face. Executive Assistant Harper Quinn walked in, a brown envelope in her hand. "Sir, there is a letter I think you should read. It was sent from Florida. The writer said, 'You changed her life.'" Nathaniel raised an eyebrow and took the envelope. The paper was slightly worn, but the writing was neat and delicate. He opened it and read slowly. "Dear Mr. Nathaniel Cross, my name is Sarah, 46 years old, and I used to work as a flight attendant for a small airline. For years, I silently watched as my colleagues were treated poorly because of their skin color, accent, or religion. I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of being eliminated, so I never dared to speak up. Then I saw his video, the man standing up in first class, calmly saying that all passengers are equal in the sky. I burst into tears, not out of sympathy, but out of shame, because I had been silent for so long. Last week, I reapplied to the industry, this time for Falcon Air. I want to work in a place where people are respected. Thank you for making me believe that justice is not an illusion. Sincerely, Sarah Whitmore." Nathaniel folded the letter, put it on the table, and was silent for a few seconds. Harper looked at him, said nothing, and gently poured more coffee. "I thought I was just changing airlines," Nathaniel said, his voice hoarse. "But it turns out there are hearts that have been waiting for this for a long time." Harper nodded, replying softly, and he gave them reason to believe in humanity again. News of Falcon Air continued to spread. Major newspapers called the story the 10-minute revolution in aviation. They said that in just 10 minutes, a calm act in the sky changed the way the world viewed human rights in the air. Within a year, more than 60 international airlines signed the Equity in the Sky Compact, using Falcon Air as a model. Universities taught Nathaniel's story in their modern business ethics course, and at the United Nations, he was invited to speak at the Leadership Through Humanity Forum. When he stepped up to the podium, he did not bring any paper. He just spoke from his heart. Justice is not just in the law. It is in the moments when we choose to respect instead of judge, to listen instead of condemn. If we can learn to share the same sky, then perhaps we can also learn to share the same dignity. The audience rose to their feet and applauded profusely. Elena Brooks, the journalist who had first filmed the video, was in the front row, quietly wiping away tears. Ling Chen, now a renowned aviation human rights director, smiled proudly. Late one afternoon, Nathaniel sat in the plane cabin again. This time not as a CEO with power and fame. He was just a passenger among passengers. The flight from London to San Francisco was uneventful. Next to him was a young Arab girl, fast asleep. In front of him, an elderly white man was reading a newspaper with the Falcon Air logo printed on it. The front page headlined Falcon Air, a new era of human dignity. Nathaniel smiled slightly. He leaned back and looked out the window. The sunset was reddening the sky, and the light reflected off the fuselage the multicolored wings, the airline's new emblem, shimmering like a stream of faith and kindness. In that moment, he suddenly remembered the boy Miles Carter, remembered the promise, "One day you will fly with me," and he believed that day was not far away. Harper once asked him, "If one day people forget your name, are you afraid?" Nathaniel simply replied, "As long as they remember what someone once said, this sky belongs to all of us." The plane broke through the clouds, the sunlight reflecting off the windshield, illuminating his face in a golden orange. The Falcon Air wings traced a long streak of light in the air, as if justice, despite the storm, continued to fly against that brilliant sky. Nathaniel Cross sat quietly, looking out the window. In his eyes, the sky was no longer just a space for flights, but a testament to a simple truth that when people choose kindness, they don't just change an airline, they change the world. Throughout the story, Black CEO kicked out of first class. 10 minutes later, he fired the entire crew. What remains is not only a spectacular reversal of power, but also a profound lesson about dignity, intelligence, and compassion. Nathaniel Cross, the man who was humiliated in the first-class cabin, chose silence over anger. It was that calmness that made him a symbol of justice that listens. The story reminds us that true power lies not in power, but in how we respond when we are treated unfairly. In a world where prejudice still exists in many forms, Nathaniel doesn't seek revenge. He chooses to rebuild the system so no one else has to suffer the same. That's the mark of a grown man, not stooping to respond to pettiness, but using his intelligence to create lasting change. And perhaps the biggest lesson is each of us has our own seat, 1A. the place where our dignity is tested. How we sit back, stay calm, and choose the right values will determine whether we can fly higher or not. Thank you for following this story to the end. If you believe that justice and humanity still deserve to be heard, please like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to help us spread stories about morality, justice, and faith in humanity. Because sometimes just one act of kindness can reduce the world's suffering.